Hey, in today's video, I'm talking about 8 shocking benefits of saturated fat. I know what you're thinking, saturated fat, how could that be healthy for us? Well, in previous videos, I have gone through the research in detail and showed you that saturated fat is not a causative agent of heart disease like we've all been told. And saturated fat actually can have really amazing health benefits. Now, not for everybody though. There are certain individuals with certain issues, perhaps maybe poor bile flow, or certain genes like the ApoE4 gene, where saturated fat would not be as beneficial for those individuals. And I'm gonna go through that in this video, but we have to start by looking at the actual benefits of saturated fat. And the number one benefit is that it's very stable and resists oxidation. You see, saturated fat has 0 double bonds. It's carbons all combined in single bonds. And that actually makes it very stable and it resists oxidation. Oxidation is kind of like a rusting. So when we leave an apple out, in the air, the apple will brown. That's oxidation. And inside of our body, our cells will actually oxidize. Components of our cells will oxidize. And that actually is a precursor to inflammation. You've probably heard that inflammation or chronic inflammation is at the root of all chronic degenerative disease, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, neurodegenerative conditions, and that's true. So the more we can bring down oxidative stress in our body, the less inflammation, and the better we're gonna age, the better energy we're gonna have, better brain function. So all those great benefits we get when we lower oxidative stress. Saturated fat resists oxidation, therefore it lowers the oxidative stress in our body. We need polyunsaturated fats like omega-6 and omega-3, but they're very fragile and they're prone to oxidation and they'll drive up inflammation if we consume too many of them because they're fragile and they'll denature and oxidize. And so we need a good amount of saturated fats to help resist the overall oxidation. Monounsaturated fats are also really good and they resist oxidation as well, just not quite as good as saturated fats. Now, research has actually shown that saturated fat consumption can actually reduce your risk of stroke. Now, why is that? The reason why is because saturated fats are so prone to resisting oxidation, therefore they lower overall chronic inflammation that affects and damages the blood vessels. It also increases the good cholesterol, HDL, right? We think about HDL levels, we think that's a good cholesterol. We want it up over 50, roughly 50 to 100. It's kind of the ideal measurement there. And when we consume a higher saturated fat diet, it increases HDL, which is a sign of lower levels of oxidation and better metabolic health. And so it lowers our risk of stroke, improves HDL levels. On top of that, it helps improve brain health, in particular, medium chain triglycerides. So we have certain types of saturated fats that are smaller than the long chain fats. They're usually 12 carbons, 10 carbons, 8 carbons. These are called medium chain triglycerides or medium chain saturated fats. And they have been shown to improve ketone production in our bloodstream. And those ketones get across the blood-brain barrier and fuel the brain. And they actually increase mitochondrial biogenesis. So they actually trigger the increase of mitochondria, particularly in the brain, but really throughout the body. And they actually trigger something called mitophagy, which is basically the breakdown of old damaged mitochondria and the recreation of new healthy stress-resilient mitochondria. And so these MCTs will help fuel the brain, give us better cognition and better memory, better mood. They've been shown to really support great brain health and lower our risk of developing neurodegenerative conditions. On top of that, some of these MCTs like lauric acid and caprylic acid are also great for the immune system. So they actually help strengthen white blood cells and they have antimicrobial factors. So they help kill off yeast. They actually damage the cell wall of pathogenic yeast like Candida. They also can damage viral components and stop viral replication. So lauric acid, we find this in mother's milk, for example. Mother's milk is actually very high in saturated fat and very high in MCTs. And so you think about it, mother's milk should be the first food that a baby consumes. It's very high in these saturated fats, very high in these MCTs, which help strengthen immune function, help improve brain health and brain growth, and overall keep oxidation and inflammation under control in the baby's body as the baby's developing. So for adults, consuming saturated fats can have many of those same great benefits. And this is one of the reasons why I love consuming a diet that's high in saturated fats. Now again, there are certain contraindications to this, and I'm going to go through that as we move on. But we also know that saturated fats help improve hormone signaling. Why is that? Because saturated fats actually provide a lot of structure in the cell membrane. So when we look at a cell, the outer wall is all fats, and those fats range from saturated fats, monounsaturated fats, as well as polyunsaturated fats, omega-3 and omega-6. So the saturated fats create strength and stability in the cell membrane. The polyunsaturated fats are fluid. They create fluidity on the cell membrane. And we need a combination of both so we get proper hormone receptor function. And so when we are not consuming enough saturated fats, the overall cell membrane can become weak and fragile, and then it becomes more susceptible for viruses to penetrate it, for pathogens to penetrate, toxins to get in, becomes more leaky. So we need that structure there so it has the right permeability, and that helps protect all the structures, the DNA, the mitochondria within the cell. On top of that, it also allows the receptor, like the insulin receptor, the thyroid receptor, all the different receptors of the cell to function properly. So saturated fats are a messenger molecule to help support good hormone function. So they actually help signal proper hormone function. And then they also help with hormone sensitivity at the cell membrane by reducing oxidative stress and providing the right structure on the cell membrane. So saturated fats are so key for that component. Now, when can saturated fats actually be a problem? Well, two major conditions. One is if you have poor, sluggish bile flow. There are a lot of people that they have a lot of scarring and inflammation in their liver and in the bile ducts in their liver and in their gallbladder. In some cases, they've already had their gallbladder taken out. For these individuals, they're not putting out a lot of bile. And for a lot of the saturated fats, particularly the long chain saturated fats, not the medium chain, but the longer chain, anything with 12 or more carbons, okay, so these longer chain saturated fats, we need bile to emulsify the fats, break them down into smaller molecules so we can then digest them effectively. If we don't, they can become very problematic. These fats, undigested in the intestines, can actually drive up inflammation, and they can become what we call lipid rafts for bad bacteria to get into the bloodstream and drive up inflammation throughout the body. So they can be real problematic if we're not getting the right bile flow. So if you have congested bile ducts, maybe you've had your gallbladder taken out, maybe you have a history of gallstones, maybe you have a history of liver problems, maybe if you consume a higher fat meal, you feel a lot of pain in your upper right quadrant of your abdominal region, or maybe you've had high liver enzymes on a blood test, or you've been diagnosed with fatty liver disease, or something along those lines, or you just don't feel good when you consume a higher fat diet. In that case, for a period of time, while you work on getting your bile flow improved, you want to actually reduce the amount of saturated fats you consume, or at least the long chain fats. You want to consume a lower fat diet for a short period of time. Meanwhile, you can use things like bitter herbs, things like dandelion, milk thistle, parsley, cilantro, radishes, ginger, turmeric, in order to help stimulate better bile flow. These things all help thin the bile and allow it to flow better through the liver. Milk thistle is really powerful for helping regenerate liver cells, regenerating cells in the bile ducts and in the gallbladder. And so consuming a lot of these types of herbs, hydrating your body really well, drinking ginger tea or dandelion tea, or doing warm lemon water, for example, will help to open up the bile flow and allow the bile to become thinner and flow better from your liver bile ducts and your gallbladder. So that's really important to understand and to remember. You can also add a castor oil pack, about 45 minutes. Do it for about 45 minutes right over the upper right quadrant where your liver is. Do that every single night, right? A little bit of castor oil on a flannel, or just actually get an actual pack that comes together. Castor oil, and put it over your liver area. And that will help to open up, dilate the bile ducts and allow bile to flow through there more effectively, and it will start the healing process as well of those liver cells, allowing them to heal effectively and regenerate themselves. And so using that castor oil can be really helpful, as well as all those bitter herbs. There's also liver supplements, liver support supplements that you can use to help support liver regeneration and bile flow. So look for those things. And once you get your bile flow dialed in, now you can start to gradually increase the amount of saturated fat you consume in your diet. The other condition is actually a genetic condition. It's called ApoE4 gene. So we all have these ApoE genotypes, which play a big role in producing cholesterol, for example, or lipoproteins in our body. And most people are in the ApoE2 or ApoE3 category, but there's about 25% of our population that has this ApoE4 gene. And for those individuals, they're at a higher risk for developing Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And for those individuals, consuming a higher saturated fat diet has been shown to be more inflammatory for them. And so for that particular subgroup, I recommend roughly about 10 to 20% of their fat calories coming from saturated fats. And instead, they should really prioritize monounsaturated fats, high quality polyphenol-rich monounsaturated fats. Things like high polyphenol extra virgin olive oil, avocados are mostly a monounsaturated fat as well, macadamia nuts. Those are going to be better sources of fats for people with the ApoE4 gene than consuming high amounts of saturated fats. Now, they can still consume some. So if they're eating a grass-fed steak, that should be fine. But roughly about 10 to 20% of the fat calories coming from saturated fats for that 25% of the population that has the ApoE4 gene, okay? Again, if you have poor bile flow for that period of time, roughly about 10 to 20% of your fats coming from saturated fat should be fine as well. But mostly, going on a lower fat diet in general until you get the bile flow functioning better is going to help those people with poor bile flow, right? So those are really the caveats here. Just about everybody else, the other 75% of the population, you want to aim to get about 50 to 60% of your fat intake from saturated fats. Now, what are some of the best sources of saturated fat? It's going to be things like grass-fed butter or grass-fed beef, grass-fed red meat in general. Why grass-fed? Because it's higher in carnosine and carnitine, as well as conjugated linoleic acid. So these other compounds that actually act in a more of a antioxidant, have an antioxidant effect, an immune stimulating effect. So when you're getting grain-fed beef, you get saturated fat, but you also get a lot of omega-6 fats. You get lower levels of carnosine, lower levels of conjugated linoleic acid. So you get less of those great benefits and more of the inflammatory omega-6 fats. So going with grass-fed red meat, grass-fed butter, that's really powerful. Coconut oil is a saturated fat. In fact, coconut oil is actually real high in those medium chain saturated fats, right? That are so good for brain health. So that's a good saturated fat. And these are the best types of things to cook with because they resist oxidation. So when you're cooking, the best oils to cook with are going to be butter, beef tallow. It's going to be things like coconut oil. Those are going to be the best things to use as opposed to olive oil or any other sort of oil, right? So I would stick with those. Avocado oil, actually not a very good oil to cook with, has a high smoke point, but a low oxidative stability. So the best things to cook with are going to be beef tallow, it's going to be coconut oil, it's going to be grass-fed butter. Grass-fed butter is my favorite because it also tastes great, high in saturated fats, which help give it that help resist oxidation. Also has antioxidants like fat-soluble retinol, vitamin A in it, conjugated linoleic acid, right? A lot of really powerful components to it. So again, the caveat here is if you have poor bile flow, you want to reduce saturated fat consumption for a short period of time, maybe 2 weeks to a month, while you actually increase the amount of bitter herbs that you're consuming, liver support supplements, using castor oil pack to help support good bile flow. And then if you have the ApoE4 gene, you can get a genetic test. We'll actually test you if you have an ApoE4 gene. If that's the case, you want to really prioritize monounsaturated fats and lots of antioxidants. People with ApoE4 gene in general need a higher amount of polyphenols and different powerful antioxidants. One of the best things for those individuals is high polyphenol extra virgin olive oil, one of the best things they can be consuming on a regular basis. If you don't have the ApoE4 gene, which is roughly 75% of the population does not have this, so 3 out of 4, then consuming more of your fat calories from saturated fats is actually really beneficial. Monounsaturated fats like olive oil, avocado is still very beneficial, still very good. You still can consume those, get great benefits, but you want to consume roughly 50 to 60% of your fat calories from saturated fat so you can overall have this powerful anti-inflammatory effect in your body, resisting oxidation and inflammation, supporting brain health, supporting hormone health, improving your HDL cholesterol, lowering your risk of all-cause heart disease, stroke, all of those kinds of things, and just maximizing your ability to thrive in life. So hopefully this is helpful. Please share it with anybody that you know and that you care about, and we'll see you soon.